Hi, I'm Sandi Genovese and welcome to this episode of the Ellison Education video series. We are looking into the night sky today because we're going to be creating a chart that shows the phases of the moon. Now when you look at the chart, the way that I have it set up, I have the Earth as it would be in the center, and you have to imagine the sunlight coming in from this direction. So when the sun is coming from this direction, because we're here in the Earth, obviously the portion of the moon that's illuminated is where it's something we can't see, which is why it appears to be dark with no moon on this particular orientation. However, as it rotates, this portion, this crescent, is what would be illuminated, and you would talk to the students about the fact that this is the waxing of the moon, where the illuminated portion is growing so that it becomes this, it goes to this, till eventually we see the entire section, the entire moon, which we would call the full moon, and then the illuminated portion that we can see from Earth starts receding, and so it starts getting smaller and smaller until this final, and this is called the waning of the moon. And one of the ways that I always remember it is when the moon appears as a C in the sky is when the moon is basically dying, and when it's the opposite of the C, that's when the moon is growing. Now in order for you to be able to create a chart like this, you need the dies. We're going to look at the moon, or the phases of the moon, and how to create those. The one thing that is very difficult to ever have the kids cut by hand would be the Earth. So let's look first at die cutting that. I'm going to take a sure cut die, and I'm going to just use the colors that I need for this, which would be, I'm going to do blue and green. And if you look at my scraps, you can see I've also been cutting lots of other things with my paper, but I don't need to cut the whole circle. I really only need the portion, the continents, in green, so I'm just using a scrap of paper for that. I'm running it through my Big Shot Pro, and I just have a cutting pad over the top, and as I bring this back over to me, I'll show you. In fact, let me set this down so that you would have, here is what would be, let me poke this out, the continents, or the land portion. There's another little continent there, but then I would take the green that I've cut out of out of cardstock, and I would go back and position this inside to create this. All of these other little pieces are also here that I would attach as well. And there's even that, it's in here, this tiny little portion that you would attach there. So you can see how quickly and easily you can create the representation of the Earth. If you look at the finished poster, the other things on here are just the representations of the phases of the moon. Now that's just a different die. I've already gone ahead and I've cut out the phases of the moon, and I wanted to show how easy it is if you want to make it very moon-like and have it appear as though it's sort of glowing. It's easy enough to do with just an ink pad that's a color. This is just a darker yellow from the yellow that I've cut, and then just as a regular makeup sponge, and I'm going to use this to transfer the ink from the ink pad onto, I'll go with this guy here, use it to create the shading. And I usually start with the edges, and I start kind of light, and you can go back and add however much, however deep, however much coloration you want. So it just creates a really cool chart that helps your students really truly understand, starting with the dark sky and the moon growing, and then, or what we would call waxing and then waning, going all the way through the full cycle of the moon. Now the full cycle of the moon, the number of days that it takes for this to happen, is generally what takes a whole month to happen. If you've heard the phrase once in a blue moon, whenever you have a full moon twice in the same calendar month, that second full moon is referred to as the blue moon. It happens very seldom. In fact, the last one was August 31st, 2012. The next one won't happen until July 31st, 2015. You can see why it's called once in a blue moon. That's a lot of years in between. And you know what? Your students' interest, it will never wane when they can make such a cool chart to study the phases of the moon.